The United States Central Intelligence Agency ran an illegal human experiment program for 20 years, from 1953 to 1973, where they literally ran experiments to learn how to brainwash and control people. It was called MK Ultra, and it was carried out on people using institutions, including but not limited to colleges, universities, hospitals, and prisons. Who knows what programs the CIA is carrying out at this very moment? A scary thought, considering how terrifying we know MK Ultra was. I remember the day it all began like it was yesterday. The sun was shining and birds were singing, but a dark shadow loomed over my heart. The men in suits arrived at my doorstep. Their faces were completely blank, and they told me I had been selected. I felt like I had no choice but to go with them. Little did I know, I was about to become part of something called Project MK Ultra. They took me to a cold, gray building surrounded by tall fences. Inside, the halls echoed with silence and the air felt really heavy. They led me to a small, windowless room. I remember that the walls were bare, and the only furniture was a metal bed with thin sheets. It made chills run down my spine. The first night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with fear and confusion, and then it started. My head filled with whispers. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the voices grew louder. They weren't speaking to me, but to each other, discussing things I couldn't understand. I know the voices were coming from inside my head. At this point, I thought maybe I was crazy, and that's why they took me away. I was a crazy person that had just been taken away and put into some kind of institution. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. The voices were constant, like a broken radio that, I couldn't turn off. I began to feel dizzy, and my head throbbed with pain constantly. I just couldn't escape the noise. It was as if a swarm of bees had taken up residence in my mind. I thought it was all me, but this is what they were doing to me. This is what they did to me. Days turned into weeks. I totally lost track of all time. The men in suits brought me food and water, but never spoke. I was alone, well, except for the voices. They were always there, whispering, taunting, and sometimes screaming. The worst part was definitely the headaches. They were unbearable, like my skull was being crushed from the inside. One night, the room felt different. The air was colder, and a sort of strange energy filled the space. I could feel it prickling my skin. Suddenly, I felt overwhelmed by a sense of dread. The shadows in the corners seemed to move and stretch towards me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I was paralyzed with fear. And that's the moment I saw it. A figure stood at the foot of my bed. It was dark and shadowy, with glowing red eyes. It didn't speak, but I felt its presence in my mind. It projected images of terror, my deepest fears and worst nightmares. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then the figure reached out a hand, and I could feel a cold grip around my throat. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and I thought I was going to die. Just when I felt myself slipping away, the figure vanished, and the room returned to normal. I gasped for air, and my body was trembling. After that night, I knew I had to escape. The voices, the shadows, the dark figure, it was all just too much. I began to search for a way out. Every day, I examined the walls, the floor, and the ceiling, looking for any weakness, any clue. One day, I noticed a loose tile on the floor. My heart raced as I pried it open, and inside was a small tunnel. It was just big enough for me to crawl through. I didn't hesitate. I wriggled into the tunnel, praying it would lead to freedom. The tunnel was long and dark. My hands and knees scraped against the rough surface, but I kept going. I could feel fresh air on my face. Finally, I emerged into the open. The night sky was above me, and I was free. But even after I escaped, the figure kept following me wherever I went. It would appear at random, and it would tell me to do terrible things. The worst thing of all was when it revealed to me one day that they had let me escape. They wanted me to escape. The tunnel I escaped from was put there on purpose. The shadow figure encouraged me to get revenge on my captors. But through all the torture, my spirit had become broken. Even now, I can barely think anymore. or do basic things. But I have figured out a way to get back at my captors, just not the way the shadow figure wants, and the way I'm assuming they want. That's why I'm telling you my story. But this is my last story, and the last thing you will ever hear from me. There are more like me out there. Watch out for them, but try to save them if you can, or the shadows could one day haunt you, too.